And good evening, everyone. My name is Amy Humbert, and I am coming to you live this evening from Fallingwater's living room. This is a closer look, and this evening we're going to be talking about the hatch and what it's like to actually go down the stairs to the stream. If at any point during this evening you have questions, please type them into the chat. You don't have to wait to the end. You can type them in at any point. My colleague Kristen will help read those off to me. We're going to get started and just go over some background history, and then we'll get right into this evening's video. So Fallingwater was designed by Frank Lloyd Wright in 1935, and Kristen's going to pull up a couple of still images that you can look at the exterior of Fallingwater while I'm talking about some of the construction dates. Mr. Wright was commissioned to design the home for the Kaufman family in 1935, and the house was built, the main building, from 1936 to mid-1937, with a guest house addition a little bit later in 1939. And we have images later that will show you of the guest house too. We are looking at the back of the building, actually looking kind of almost there to the far left where that darker area is behind the tree. That's actually where the main entrance is. So we're looking at the driveway going behind the building. The owners of Fallingwater were the Kaufman family of Pittsburgh. They were a department store family. They owned Kaufman's department store. Their son, who is shown in the middle in this photograph, their adult son, studied under Frank Lloyd Wright in 1934. His parents had gone out to Frank Lloyd Wright's school, Taliesin, and talked with Wright about the possibility of a commission for a vacation home, possibly an office for the Kaufman department store, and perhaps a few civic projects for the city of Pittsburgh as well. Now, those civic project commissions did happen. Mr. Kaufman commissioned Frank Lloyd Wright to design an apartment building for Pittsburgh. There were two different designs for bridges to be built down in the area where the Golden Triangle is today. There was a parking garage for the Kaufman department store. And unfortunately, for various political reasons, those civic projects were not built. But what was completed was not only Fallingwater, but also an office for the Kaufman department store. And that was installed in a room in one of the upper floors of the building. Now, by the 1970s, Fallingwater was open to the public, and Edgar Kaufman Jr. was living in New York City working as a curator. He had donated Fallingwater to a private nature conservancy back in 1963. And he was no longer involved in the department store business. So he had the office dismantled, and it was given to the Victoria and Albert Museum in London. So that is Europe's one Wright building, basically, to show. So Fallingwater opened to the public in 1964. We were designated a National Historic Landmark in 1976. And a little over 2 years ago, we were designated with 7 other Frank Lloyd Wright sites a UNESCO World Heritage Site. And you're looking, that last shot was of the guest house in the pool. And this photo shows Edgar Kaufman Jr. on the far right at the designation, where he is handing over the deed to the president of the Western Pennsylvania Conservancy there on the far left. So we are quite proud of operating Fallingwater as a museum. When the house was entrusted to us in 1963, a gift of roughly 1,900 acres was also made. Now, since that time, the Conservancy has continued purchasing additional acres, because what we want to do is to try to maintain the quality of the stream that flows under the building. So today's acreage totals closer to 5,000 acres. So it's a very large plot of land. And that allows us to not only maintain stream quality, but also maintain things like the view shed, so that There's no new construction or any buildings that happen within sight of the house. The art collection, Edgar Kaufman Jr. did retain for technically ownership of it until roughly about 1986, and then the collections were given as well. And when Fallingwater opened to the public, we were one of the very few Frank Lloyd Wright sites that came into the public with our original furniture collection completely intact. So we're very proud of the fact that while we may not have every single piece of freestanding furniture that the Kaufmans bought on their own, we have all of the furniture that Wright designed for the building. So I am going to go ahead and get my camera turned around. And I want to mention to you that it is a very rainy evening in southwestern Pennsylvania. So our light levels are going to be a little bit low. I'm standing actually in the center of the room, just panning around. This is our main living room, our main open plan public space, really, I should say, because it is more than just a living room. The Kaufman's dining area, a small study, a music area, and then these beautiful outdoor terraces are all part of that 1,800 square feet. But with it being cloudy and a bit rainy, that could affect some of the image quality. So it may make some of the images appear perhaps not quite as crisp. Also, we are having some issues with our Wi-Fi. It's always a challenge getting it to transmit with a high signal because we're working with a building that's stone and concrete. So if your image gets perhaps like a little bit wavy, that's on our end probably. And if for some reason I would drop out of the Zoom call, Kristen is monitoring. She'll know that I've dropped out. Just hang in there with us and I'll get reconnected. It also could cause the audio to lag just a little bit too, just so you're aware. Now, I'm going to move over kind of towards the hatch, but actually before I do that, I want to pull up, have Kristen pull up a still image that shows a drawing of the floor plan of the building, because I think this is interesting to look at and see that the beam that makes up the curved wall of the back of the building. So if you are looking there on the right-hand side of the building, that last beam, these are concrete beams. They are reinforced on the inside with steel. You can see that that beam has a very large curve, and I'll show you where that curve is here live in the building. But you can also see the cutaway that was made to allow the stairs to drop down to the water. So Kristen, you can go ahead and bring it back to me live. And I know I don't have great signal over here, but I'm going to attempt to move over into this area so that I can show you. Area are the windows to the hatch. And then the curved wall, which is part of that beam, can be seen just here through the windows. And you can see the back of it there. So that is a structural beam that I was showing you. And then you can see that it continues up and forms almost like a little parapet wall or just a small wall so that people could stand out there on the terrace and be able to look over it down to the water below. And then I'm going to bring us around in the living room over to the hatch. And the signal quality over there has not been very strong. The other issue is that when it rains, we, for safety reasons, are not permitted to actually go down the steps. But we thought the forecast looked like it was going to rain. So earlier in the week, we filmed going down the hatch so that you could see what that was like and see how the windows open and everything. And plus, Krista and I are going to try to open those windows for you today so you can actually see how they work. So when the stairs going to the water were proposed, Mr. Kaufman looked at the plans and he questioned why he needed steps dropping out of the living room down to the water. At the bottom of those stairs, you're not that far from them. So he knew he really could not swim. Sometimes it would be a little too swift to wade, just depending on how deep the stream was. And he realized those stairs were going to be a big expense. So he really questioned Frank Lloyd Wright, and in fact, he just recommended that they not build them at all. And Edgar Kaufman Jr., who was Edgar and Lillian's only son, who had studied under Wright, really kind of argued, along with Frank Lloyd Wright, for the inclusion of those stairs. The architect and Edgar Jr. felt that they were important to connect the home and the stream together. So it was on outside of the house that was actually connecting the building with. What a wonderful thing to have. Okay, I'm going to step back just a little bit so my signal gets a little stronger because signal quality is lagging over there. So Frank Lloyd Wright had felt that having those stairs was a chance for the Kaufmans to actually get to the stream and interact with what they loved so much. Now, Kristen is going to come over and actually open up the hatch for us. So I'll move over to where I can try to see her push the windows back. They're covered over with steel frame windows, single pane glass. The hatch was 7, which was the last element to kind of get the building airtight and closed in. And the windows, perhaps you can see, are actually sliding under one another. So each one drops under the next, and they will push all the way back under the flowers. And you can see we opened the 2 doors in the front. At the bottom, there is a small platform. There are lights in it. So it must have been a wonderful place to go down and just sit and kind of tip your stream. Stays mid-50s most of the summer, and it does support brook trout. And there are screens that could be installed under those windows. Now, we don't have them in place currently, but it was possible to push the windows back, close all of the screens, and keep the insects out. And the windows, incidentally, they're resting on ball bearings in that track. And you can actually push that top back really with one feet. So Kristen, I'm going to have you pull up, taken from about where I'm standing, of the hatch before the glass was installed. So we know it would have been actually before 1937. And you can see the stone pier, which is just over to my left. And of course, so the concrete, the back of the hatch has been poured. The slab under us, of course, has been completed, but just the windows are remaining to be installed. But I find the ones that we do have to be really fascinating to see how the work was taking place. They hired a lot of local men from the area. The contractor was from just below the Pennsylvania.
Sorry, everyone, give us just 1 second while we get Amy up and running again.
And I'm back. I'm so sorry. I was trying to stand in an area where we thought perhaps the signal might be strong enough, but I had to move a little farther back. So, Kristen, I'm going to go ahead and have you pull up the next, which, okay, let me step back a little closer here to the entrance. Is it still lagging? Okay. This is an image taken during construction.
Oh, there we go. I was gonna say, I really apologize, everyone. We're just getting her back up again.
Some of the joys of working with Wi-Fi in this house. We did a practice session just before we started and we had pretty good connectivity, but I think the weather's probably not helping us. Okay, so we're looking now at an image of the underside of the building. So you're actually getting a chance to see the foundation piers underneath the building. Sometimes they are referred to as bolsters. So what I'm talking about are those concrete slab. Also, you can see the opening where that was formed within the slab for the stairs to drop down through. Of course, they've not been installed yet at this point. But I also wanted to mention that we, in addition to doing work on the bridge over Bear Run this year, we are also doing work on those concrete bolsters. And if you are with us in a few weeks when we are doing the preservation episode, our director of preservation, Scott Perkins, will talk about some of the work that we're doing. Let's take a look at the next historic image that we have. And so we're a little bit closer. We're actually standing in the stream and kind of looking up through that hatch. Again, the steps have not been cast in place yet. The steel is not there that they hang off of, but we are a little bit closer to those concrete bolsters. If you're wondering how many of those foundation piers there are there are 4. One is a stone wall, and then 3 are the concrete piers that this photo was taken actually just next to. Now, one question we frequently get when we talk about the hatch is, were there problems with flooding? And in the mid 1950s, specifically in the fall of 1954, and then again in 1956, there were two floods that hit Bear Run and caused some damage. The interesting thing, I think, is that the water did not come from underneath the house from the stream. The house sits 10 feet above the stream. Where they were getting water into the building is from the back side of the house because there's a cliff behind us. So runoff was coming down the back of the cliff and then coming in through the entrance doorway and through the kitchen doorway. So they did get mud into the building on this first floor, but it was from the back of the building, not from the stream under them. And some of the issues that they did have where the stream did get pretty high was because there was a lot of debris in it, trees and brush that came down in that water and clogged under the bridge that crosses the stream. So there's a bridge over Bear Run that you can see just out beyond those windows. It's the vehicular bridge that you drive across, and the water of the stream actually came over top of that bridge because there was so much debris that clogged under it that the stream could not flow underneath. And at that point, you can see the railings of the terrace just outside. Bear Run was up almost to the level of those terrace walls. But the description that we hear is that the glass doors of the terraces held tight. So the water and mud here on the first floor was from runoff behind them. But the part of the building that suffered the most damage was actually the stairs that go down to the water, because a lot of debris was banging into them and hitting them. And the stairs actually hung out of the concrete slab and just were suspended above the water. They were not anchored to the bedrock at all when they were first built. So after the first flood in the fall of 1954, Edgar Kaufman Jr. had the stairs repaired, and they took two pieces of steel that went right through the small concrete pad at the bottom and actually anchored into the bedrock of the falls. And so that stabilized them quite a bit. Then again, there would be another repair in the early 90s, about 1992, in which the steps were actually completely removed and recast. And then one more time in 2003. And the photo that you're looking at in right now that Kristen has shared is an image from the 2003 repair. So this is really our third set of steps. And in this repair, not only did we recast the concrete treads, but the steel that holds them in place was replaced with stainless steel. And the stainless steel should last much longer because it won't corrode. So hopefully we have a set of steps that's going to last us quite a long time. Now, we do monitor Bear Run quite closely and remove any debris that begins to clog it. So we really try to keep a watch on it. Now, I'm going to have Kristen go ahead and share the video that we took that actually does take us down the steps. So it'll show you kind of what it's like to walk down them. And she goes about halfway down. You can see I'm opening the hatch up here, pushing the windows back, and I'll open those doors at the front. And you can also perhaps see that there's a lot more light here because it was not raining on this particular day. So the room was filled with quite a bit more light. It was not as dark as it is today. And once I'll step back here out of the way so that you're able to see, and then Kristen will actually go down the steps. So there is a small concrete pad there at the bottom. It has 2 lights in it. And when I talked about securing the stairs to the stream in 1956, the steel was inserted through that pad into the bedrock of the falls. There's a question from Andrea as to whether the steel rebar, when we recast the stairs in 2003, whether or not it was coated with an epoxy coating. And I'm trying to remember from the specifications. I believe that it was. The repair that we just also completed this summer, where we repaired and installed new concrete on the bridge, I believe the rebar there was also coated with epoxy, but that's a question that I'll make sure we ask of Scott Perkins here in a few weeks. So Kristen was looking forward at the bridge, but she's turning around to show you where the waterfall drops off underneath the building. And it's fairly close to where the stairs are. So she's standing on them, and you'll see just the edge of the falls. You can just barely see it. It almost blends in with the rest of the landscape. The waterfall is roughly about 15 feet tall. And then the first floor is 10 feet above the stream. So if you're standing on the balcony that hangs over the edge of the falls, you're roughly 25 feet from the ground. And when we filmed some of this image, some of the construction materials were still in place. So you can see a large brown box on the corner of a rectangular stone pool. That pool was a plunge pool that Lillian Kaufman used. It's 4.5 feet deep when it's full. It is cold water. Plunge pools are to boost circulation and help with inflammation. And that box on the corner of it is covering a sculpture. So that's just a temporary measure. Now we're looking in between the bolsters, and some of the work that we've been doing here is actually removing the paint and the stucco coat right down to what you're seeing as exposed concrete. And when they put a new stucco coat, they're going to be applying it over a steel mesh that will hopefully help it adhere a little bit better. We're also repointing at the base of those concrete piers. There are stone footers, and we're going to be repointing those as well. Those piers would have been one of the very first projects that they did at Fallingwater following the bridge over Bear Run. Kind of looking in between 2 of the bolsters there. And you can see some of the paint has not quite been removed. And it did, originally, when that plunge pool was filled, and it did fill from the stream, the water would spill over the edge of the stone wall and back into Bear Run. We've had a fairly dry summer, so the stream is down a little bit, but it's never dried up completely on us. And here we're kind of looking back up through where that railing is along the back of the hatch. You're noticing a little bit of a green cast to the paint. There are parts of the building, if they don't get a lot of sun, or areas that are very close to the stream, that we do get some biogrowth, some algae and things, and that is usually removed with cleaners that it can be safely used around the stream. And she was just filming looking back up through the hatch windows. There's a question wondering about how often the Kaufmans used the hatch. Edgar Kaufman Jr. was with us until 1989, and he did seem to indicate that going down there was something that they did enjoy to do regularly. And I know there is reference to some of their guests going down and kind of just hanging out and dangling their feet in the stream. I think it must have been a very quiet spot to possibly go down and read or perhaps sit and sip a glass of wine. I know that in the end, both Edgar and Lillian were quite glad that the stairs were built. If you remember in the beginning, I was saying that Mr. Kaufman initially had his doubts as to whether or not they should be built. So he was quite pleased in the end that they did construct them. Now, since the 1950s, there have really only been two other times that we've recorded any kind of flood that was significant. One was in the early 1970s, and there was not any significant damage that was done to the building that I've seen any record of, just that there's a note made on the preservation timeline that Bear Run did get quite high. However, in 2017, we had a flood that we're going to show you some images of, and I've worked Kristen, are we back? Okay, we're back. I dropped briefly for one moment and I did not even move. Okay, we're going to show you an image of a flood that occurred in late July 2017, and you are looking down into the plunge pool. You can see how high the waters were. A rock had come loose from upstream and hit the corner of the plunge pool. And what you can see that is black just there on that far corner is a very large Jacques Lipschitz sculpture, which was damaged in the 1956 flood and repaired by the artist. And when he repaired it, it was chained in place. Well, it's a good thing it was, because when the rock hit the corner of the plunge pool, the Lipschitz sculpture was knocked off and was dangling upside down in the water, as you can see. I've never seen anything like this in 35 years. This is an extremely rare event. Bear Run is a high gradient stream. It's 5 miles long. It drops over 1,400 feet. So water moves out of here quickly. And even after on this occasion, when the water was as high as it was, and you can see here a photo of the hatch stairs, this would have been taken from out on the bridge. The water level had dropped significantly within probably 1 or 2 days. So water does move out quite quickly, but this was really a very unusual event that occurred. Now, when the Lipschitz sculpture was recovered and reinstalled, there was a new anchoring device that was created for it to hopefully secure it even more strongly to the base of the plunge pool. So, ladies and gentlemen, I wasn't able to actually walk you about any to best to answer them. Let's try. I'm so sorry, everyone. I know the weather is changed. Do you have any, welcome to type them into the chat. I just wanted to kind of try to hang in there a moment and see if any of you have questions you would like to ask. We really appreciate joining us on these evenings for a closer look. We have a different theme every Wednesday, and we will be continuing to offer them through the beginning of September.